Hello everyone, you've guessed it, it's Dr. Paul Rose again, and here we have come to the very end of the structure of a research project. In fact, I'm now completely off my egg timer diagram. The conclusion, right at the very end, is the part of the project that explains the overall most important finding to the reader. And the abstract, right at the very beginning, before you start writing your introduction, is the overall summary that is the reader's first introduction to what you have done, your complete experimental design, an aspect of your research. So we're going to look at these two concepts together because they are the last things that you write when you produce research outputs. You write the conclusion once the discussion is completed because you know that you fully evaluated your results and your experimental approach. You've contextualized your findings, you've identified positive aspects and limitations, and you have suggested research extensions. You've gone through each aim and hypothesis in turn, and you've showed the meaning behind your results. Once you've written your conclusion and your overall project is finished, you then write your abstracts. The abstract is the research in miniature. It's the summary of the entire process. And let's be honest, it's the thing that most people read when they're checking to see if a paper is useful to their own work. So the abstract is really important. Yes, we write it last, but that doesn't mean it's least important. I'm going to start off with a conclusion, starting at the end of the flow from introduction down to discussion. We're summarising what we have found out. Here's a conclusion from a paper on lemurs and visitor effects that's published in Zoo Biology. Given that the ring-tailed lemur and visitor effects have been a consistent thread throughout some of these presentations already, I thought this would be a nice way to wrap up. You can see that the conclusion from this article is written as a bulleted list. And that's because when you write a conclusion to publish in Zoo Biology, they ask for a bulleted list. That doesn't mean that every conclusion should be written like this. Always follow your research project guidelines or the guidelines of the journal you are writing for. Some expect a bulleted list, others expect one or two fluid paragraphs. What you can see from this conclusion is it explains what has been found, it gives the context behind them, and it applies it to the wider world. It does not have any novel information, referencing, or discussion. The key point to a good conclusion is to tell the reader the most important finding overall. So we can basically break down a good conclusion into two key points. A description of your overall result, which is the take-home message for the reader. What you have found. What should they take away from reading your article? Then, once it's stated the take-home message, it should contextualize that to the wider world. It should give some application. Tell the reader the overall application of the research and why they should care. State your finding, give the application. Short and sweet, no novelty, no referencing, your conclusion is done. Please remember that a conclusion does not contain any new information. It shouldn't be an extension of the discussion to evaluate interesting things that might be relevant. Please do not evaluate or explain references. Generally, the only time we reference in a conclusion is if we are referring back to precedent. If our research is based on a previous study and we have found something similar or different. We do not extend the literature review. We do not have more discussion. We don't write an ambiguous paragraph that leaves the reader wondering what the point of the research was. Be very clear in stating what you have found out and why it matters. Therefore, we should keep the conclusion short, 1 or 2 paragraphs maximum, placed at the very end of the discussion. The conclusion can have a separate subheading, or you can start it in a way so the reader knows it is the conclusion. For example, when you have finished your discussion, you can start your conclusion with, to conclude, this research has shown that lemurs display no effect of behaviour change in the presence of zoo visitors. Remember back to my discussion presentation where I mentioned that if you ever use the words to conclude, but you're halfway through your discussion, scrub them out and start again. The reader needs to know that the very end of the discussion is the conclusion, which is the take-home message and its wider application. Once you've done your conclusion and you've taken a sigh of relief and maybe had a gin or 5 and you've finished your project, you then need to read over it, consider what you've done and write your abstract. Give yourself some time between finishing the introduction through to the conclusion before you write the abstract. Make sure the project is fresh, read with fresh eyes, so you know what you're going to summarise. Here is the abstract from my aforementioned article from Zoo Biology on ring-tailed lemurs and any effects of visitors. I like this abstract. Again, it's succinct and an overall summary of what they studied, how they did it, what they found, and why it matters. It's basically the overall research project distilled down into one easy to understand chunk that tells the reader whether or not it's worth reading the overall article. Give your abstracts to other scientists, to other researchers, to people working in the field. Can they understand what you've done? Can they pick out the overall key elements of your research project? It's always good to have some peer feedback on your abstract because what you have written might not be well understood by others. So the abstract itself is the overall summary of the whole write-up. It's not just the results and it's not just the conclusion, and it should not be a mirror of the introduction. It should contain elements of each section. It provides the reader with the key elements of what you questioned, how you collected your data, and what you discovered overall. And please remember, as I said previously, the abstract is generally read by more people than those that go on and read the overall paper. So make a good impression. It's important. It's basically your advert for the research that you have done. Please distill your abstract down into a short and easy to understand paragraph. Word lengths for abstracts vary, but from published papers, we see a range from 150 to 350 words on average. Brevity is key. Be concise, avoid waffle and unnecessary background information. Keep the abstract very much to the point of what you have done. Here is my 5-point list to writing a good abstract. Other examples are going to be readily available, but this is how I was taught and what I have always followed to write a good abstract. The first part of the abstract, the first couple of sentences, tell the reader what you investigated, the topic that you studied, and any important background information. It's best not to reference unless your study is based on precedent, but you can still explain the background information to your own research question. Once you've done that, give a sentence or two to your key aims and questions. These form the basis for the explanation of your methods. That's the third section of your abstract. Brief explanation of data collection procedures. Any key techniques that you followed in the zoo, in the field, on the farm, in the lab. Make sure the reader knows where data came from. Once you've done that, tell the reader, what have you found out? What is the finding that should grab their attention to make them read more? Don't give every result in the abstract, but the most important ones that make the research accessible. And once you've done that, Give a brief explanation of the finding and finish with a conclusion that puts the results in context. Just like your conclusion has the overall summary and what it means, the overall summary of your results, so the concluding section of your abstract should do something similar. What is your most important finding and what's its relevance overall? That way, you're taking the reader from the background through what you did and your findings to why they matter overall. So to finish, here's my checklist of what you need to do for a good conclusion and for a good abstract. Write your conclusion once the discussion has been completed. Conclude what you have actually found rather than what you wished you had found. Keep it short and only review your results. No novelty, no discussion, no new information. Simply, this is my overall finding and why it's important. Remember to avoid referencing citation or novelty unless your work is based on precedent and you're referring back to that piece of work to contextualize your overall finding. Once you have written the conclusion and polished off the overall project, sit down, take a deep breath, read over it, and then write your abstract. You can follow my 5-point checklist to be clear and concise, starting with the background information, a brief explanation of aims, description of key methodological points, your most important results, and the overall conclusions from what you've found. Hopefully, by following this checklist, you'll be able to have an easy to understand, easy to digest discussion and a relevant abstract that contextualizes all of your findings overall. Hopefully this has been useful to you. I hope that you can watch each of these presentations in turn as you go through the writing of your research project, and therefore you will end up with a clear and valid article, a clear and useful thesis that shows why you've been ethical, objective and repeatable in your application of the scientific method to the research that you've conducted. Thank you very much.